Corruption. This is a serious thing, and people think it's pretty bad. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it from two perspectives: the micro or the individual perspective, and the broad macroeconomic perspective. I think it is a significant problem when it comes to the individual level, individual character, but not so significant when it comes to the broad macroeconomic perspective. Let's first talk about the problem at the individual level. I think corruption, one of the ways of looking at it is that it's like slow poison. Uh, it an individual becomes corrupt over a period of time, slowly, gradually. It is something that creeps upon you. It is not suddenly, you don't notice it, and before you notice it, you are already started doing corrupt things. It's like the it's like the boiling frog phenomenon I discussed earlier. You put a frog into boiling water, it jumps out because it's too hot, and it's shockingly hot. But if you put a frog into a normal pot of water and then start slowly heating the pot, the frog starts maybe enjoying it, doesn't maybe notice the heat because it is gradual, and then gets sleepy and drowsy, and eventually it gets boiled without even noticing that it has been boiled, so it dies. So it would have noticed if the temperature difference was very large, but it doesn't notice because the temperature difference is small and increases gradually. So probably corruption, an individual gets corrupted like this. And that is where one has to be very careful. You become corrupt before you notice it because it creeps upon you slowly, gradually. You don't even know, and you start making small compromises, and you think, oh, what's a big deal? A small thing, not a big deal. Not doing What is the big deal about doing something small, just a minor compromise? You make these compromises because there are huge temptations, or there are pressures, direct, indirect. There is jealousy, there is pressure from family, or maybe spouse or kids, or maybe there's a lot of temptation. Maybe you see others doing it. There's pressure from others who want you to be corrupt or like them, or others who want to corrupt you. So you start making small compromises. It's small, so it's not a big deal. You don't think you are doing something seriously wrong. And then eventually it doesn't feel bad, so you start doing it. Then you start getting used to it, and then you become more and more and more corrupt. So the way to guard against it is like treat this thing as if there is a Lakshmana Rekha, a red line. You don't cross that line. You don't cross the Lakshmana Rekha. You stay this side only. The smallest, tiniest step is also bad. So Lakshmana Rekha is just a very thin line, right? A red thin line, kind of a red line as they say it in the West. So either you are this side or that side. If you are that side, you are corrupt. If you are this side, you are not corrupt. So it is either or, 0 or 1, binary kind of a thing. The smallest compromise would mean that you have crossed over. So don't do that. No compromises. That is the only way to probably guard against this. Otherwise, you start doing it, you have done it once, so what is the big deal? It's like you had a puff of a cigarette, you already had a puff, so no harm in smoking the whole cigarette. You had a sip of liquor, so what's wrong with having a full drink, a whole drink, a small peg or a bigger peg or a drink? And then maybe that's the way you start. And then you start maybe drinking seriously, it becomes a problem. So don't start with this small sip or small puff. Just say no to that. No compromises. So you have to be very alert, very watchful. And this seductive, tempting thing, you have to kind of say, get thee behind me, Satan, or something like that. You have to, be alert and just stay away from it, and reject it quickly, abruptly, drastically, radically. Don't let it come near you. Otherwise, this thing can become a bigger issue as far as your character is concerned. If you are concerned about that, your morality or your character. And there are two things here: you corrupt people and people corrupt you. People corrupt you by putting a lot of temptations in your way. It's not that the bureaucrats and the government people are corrupt. Sometimes they are okay, but then the businessman puts a lot of temptations in front of them, and this poor fellow can't resist that temptation. It's difficult. So then he starts doing it. So here the businessman is guilty of corrupting a straight guy. And sometimes the guy is himself corrupt and he's asking for a bribe on his own or cut like that. So sometimes you are guilty of corrupting people, and sometimes people are guilty of corrupting you. Either way, it's bad. It's like, you know, whenever we in Puranas, Hindu Puranas, we have this story of some rishi sitting in meditation and doing some tapasya, and when he starts doing it, the throne of Indra starts shaking. So Indra sends some apsara, and the apsara dances in front of the rishi, and the rishi breaks his trance is broken, and the tapasya gets broken. So that is the temptation part of it. So sometimes people are guilty of tempting others and making extremely tempting offers and extremely seductive offers so that the poor guy can't resist it. Temptation, huge temptations can be difficult to resist. So corrupting others happens is also something. You corrupt people and people can corrupt you. And when it comes to, I mean, shouldn't do both are bad. But when it comes to seduction and temptation coming your way, be clear that you won't make any compromise. You will stay on the straight and narrow path. That's the only way. Once you start deviating, then you already done it. So it's like, I already had one drink, so maybe one more drink won't hurt, and one more drink won't hurt, and then a bottle won't hurt, and stuff like that, probably. So that is about corruption happening at an individual level, at a micro level, which can be a serious issue if one looks at one's own character, values, morality, and people. I don't want to be corrupt. I hate corrupt people. I hate myself for being corrupt, and all those moral crises. So that's a serious issue at an individual level. But if you look at it in a macroeconomic perspective, I don't think it's that big a problem as it is made out to be. Like people say, oh, the problem is that politicians are corrupt, and that's the sole problem that this country has is corruption. This is wrong. It's like somebody would say, oh, the only problem is that we have no education or very little education. Educate everybody and the problem would be solved. It's not that. It's not that simple. There are many other problems. Corruption is a problem. Uneducation is a problem. There are many other problems. Educating everybody or even increasing education is not going to solve all problems. So corruption is one problem. It's not the only problem worth solving, only big problem. There are many big problems. And people always keep saying, oh, everybody is corrupt and they are all crooks. They are fond of saying that. It's like people are always complaining about inflation. Oh, there is too much inflation. Prices are rising. Prices are rising. Of course, they are rising all the time. Prices have always been rising, generally. Sometimes they rise at a faster pace. Sometimes they rise at a smaller clip. But they are rising. But nobody has ever, it's like a huge deal. I mean, prices are rising, complaining all the time about inflation. It's a problem, okay. But a guy not having a job and starving is a bigger problem. Then maybe you have to shell out a few bucks more for something. Unemployment for the unemployed is a huge, bigger problem. Then you having to shell more money for some product or service. So unemployment is an intense, concentrated problem for the unemployed, whereas inflation is a universally distributed problem for so many people. So it pinches everybody a little bit. But for the unemployed guy, not getting employed is a huge, strong killer problem, right? So corruption is a problem. But in terms of macro level numbers, it's just a percentage kind of a thing. Look at the GDP of the country, and if you look at the level of corruption, maybe is a bit small percentage. It's like you're running a business and you have a turnover of X, and there is something called bad debts. When you have, you are unable to collect money for the products that you have sold, so you write off. People do that. There is people do businessmen write off bad debts. Eventually, they have to write off. But how big a bad is a bad debt problem? Maybe it's a 2%, 1%, 1.5%, or something like that. It's your turnover is 100, and maybe 100% total income, and then 2% of it, 1% of it, 0.25% or half a percent of it, or 3% of it is bad debt. It's not 100% or 20% or 30%. So corruption is like that, I think. Maybe earlier it was more or less, but on the whole, overall, I don't think it's a huge, massive problem that it is made out to be. There is corruption, but it's like an inevitable side effect of economic activity. It's like you produce heat, light, and some light is lost in power. And when you transmit and distribute power, some power gets lost in transmission distribution losses. Light and heat go together. So when light is produced, some energy is lost by way of heat. That is natural. So corruption is like a small side effect of the overall economic activity. Some corruption is bound to happen. Some people are crooks. It's the nuisance value of doing something useful. So so people think it is a huge, massive problem, and it is the only problem that maybe holds the country back or a country back. But it's not true. I don't believe in it. There are many other problems: stupidity, incompetence, are also big problems. Corruption is one problem. Sometimes it's not good. One would be happy if there were no corruption. But percentage wise, how big is it? How big is it seriously? And we don't really know. But I don't think it's a massively crippling problem. Okay, that one, once we take care of it, everything will be hunky dory. And generally, people have like saying this. They are used to this. They like complaining about it, like they complain about inflation. They like saying all politicians are crooks and everybody's a crook and they are all on the take and everybody is corrupt. That's maybe some sort of anger or frustration, generalized anger or frustration or venting against the system, or maybe some jealousy when they see people doing well and they are not corrupt, or maybe they are not on the take. So they think everybody is on the take, and the whole problem is because they didn't take money and somebody else is taking money, and so the whole system is corrupt. I think that is a generalized sense of frustration or anger or maybe jealousy rather than the reality. Okay, there is corruption. There is some percentage of it, corruption. But as I said, in percentage terms, is it 50%? I don't think so. Is it 60%? Is it 10%? Could be. But is it 60, 70%? No. So it's a problem, but not that big a problem. There are other big problems like stupidity, incompetence, and many other problems. So just corruption is not the only huge problem that is holding a country back, and solving it will solve all your problems. No. And political parties like this, they use corruption to target their opponents. That's how they win votes. So this thing becomes the narrative, gets, then there's how the narrative continues. One political party will say those guys are corrupt, and they will keep on making allegations because they know that people hate corruption and people like to hear about corruption. And if they keep on saying somebody is corrupt, people will start hating those guys, and maybe they will vote for them. So this corruption is an election winning technique, I think, and can't even be proven. It doesn't, you don't record those transactions, and these are not bank accounts, and it's all in cash and all, so you can't even prove it. So very easy to say somebody is corrupt, and people like hearing that somebody is corrupt. Somehow it, I don't know why, but people like hearing these stories about corruption and hearing that somebody is corrupt. They always want somebody to be corrupt, and political parties sling these accusations at each other because they know that they can swing voters that way. If they can prove, or if they can create a strong story about somebody else's corruption, it can get them votes. So they perpetuate this idea that there is a lot of corruption and others are very corrupt and they are very pure. So there is corruption. It's a phenomenon that is there almost everywhere, maybe a bit more and a bit less in some places. It's a problem. But at an individual level, as far as a person is concerned, in terms of his character, his morals, it's a serious problem. It's a serious moral problem. But at a macroeconomic level, it's kind of a, how big is it really in relational terms, in terms of proportion. And I think then there, I think it's a problem, but not that big a problem. There are other big problems also. So it's there, it can be reduced, it may increase, it's a problem, but it's not the only thing. And solving it would be good, but that doesn't mean that that will provide heaven on earth. No, that's just one problem, like many other problems. Thank you.